Perfect, perfect. Thanks for being here. So the SPIA Asia webinar series was really created to keep in touch during these COVID times. We made it a test for all of the technologies that we now need to use because we're not able to meet in person. And it has become really a nice success. We've been all over the world, and the viewers and the audiences have grown. Other partners and friends who have adopted similar systems have just, let me just go back a little bit. So the World Football Summit a few months back, they had their first virtual conference, and it was a great success for these guys. Sport Matters, All Matters, and Jasper, they just finished last week's event in Singapore, hugely successful. And I personally loved that Cookie Monster from Sesame Street was part of the show. My friend Chris Robb from Mass Participation World is planning his first event in October. And obviously SPIA Asia is going to be one of the virtual conferences coming up soon. And we will make our announcement of what's happening before the end of this month. There have been a lot of positives because we were able to create these webinars and conferences online. We were able to connect with people who might have otherwise not been part of what we're trying to do in Asia. And I'm not sure if he has logged on already, but I think Jeff Munn, he's the president from the Harlem Globetrotters out of Arizona, has linked up with us again, and he registered. So Jeff and I, we had the pleasure of bringing the team over here, I think in 2006 and 2007 to the UAE. So it's great that someone like him would be is able to join these webinars. Stefan, were you part of this one? Did you see the Globetrotters perform during those times when they came to Dubai and Abu Dhabi?
I did. Very, very long time ago, I think, Eric. I think it must have been in like 2006.
Yes.
Yeah, it was amazing. It was incredible, though. Very entertaining.
Yeah, they weren't here for about 20 years, and it was really put some smiles on the faces. So that's great. So Jeff Munn, if you hear us, good morning from Dubai, and thanks for joining in here. One of the reasons why we're able to connect globally is obviously through our live platform. So a big thanks and shout out to One Place Sports out of Singapore. We're live on Facebook and YouTube today, and we will upload afterwards our show, obviously, on our platforms as well. But let's get started. Type your questions in the Q&A session, put your hellos into the chat box, and enjoy the session. So like I said, this morning, we're starting off with Thijs. Thijs, tell us, what does it mean, International Sports and Health Research Consultant? But we also want to know from your previous role, you've been a director for sports services, player services with FIFPro, which is the union of the football players. And this is what we're trying to talk about today. It is all about player welfare and a second career planning, something that tons and tons and tons of athletes have now been really exposed to, that suddenly income streams and revenue streams have dried up during the pandemic. And some of them probably have realized that maybe they are not so well looked after when it comes down to career ending situations or a break in a career. So Thijs, all over to you. Good morning, and thank you once again for joining us. And yes, tell us a little bit about what your current role is and what is FIFPro?
Yes, I have an academical background in communication and also background as a trainer on a grassroots level. So that's a little bit my background that helped me in my work with FIFPro. FIFPro, as you know, is the collective voice of the players. It's the worldwide body of national player unions, and they are representing the players. And I've worked there for 20 years, first 10 years more or less director of communication, last 10 years director of player services. And since last year, I'm working as an independent consultant. From this background, it's obvious that my job is player driven, and it's my strong belief that player representation does not only help the players, but helps strengthen the football industry in general. And that's my main objective by the work that I'm doing. And it's not all countries in the world, also not all countries in Asia have a player union, but I'm convinced that even when there is no player union in a country, it's important for the league or for the FA to organize player representation, and I think it will. Yeah, it will help the football industry to really become a grown-up and professional industry.
Why was there a reason for a union, and how do I join a union like this? Is it free? Is it mandatory? Is it an automatic membership like what you have with some of the other sports federations? I mean, what's the background behind it?
That's that depends on most of it's. Now you have to be a member. You have to show that you want to be part of this union. It's not a huge amount that players are asked for, but it's not automatically. That would be too easy. But with a good story, you get 90 to 100% contribution of the players in your union, because it's your job to convince a player that it's really worthwhile to be a member of a union. And yes, that in theory this results in a contribution of 90-100%, 90 to 100% of the players in a players union. And well, we come to talk about that later, but preparing a player not only during his career, but also for a second career after he ended his professional football career is an important part of the job of a players union.
Yes, there must have been some issues in the past that somebody had the idea to have a players union, because FIFPro is probably much more aggressive than, let's say, on the ATP, the tennis side, the what the Players Council and the support that's been extended, for instance, like for tennis players. No? I think it's FIFPro is much more organized and much stronger. No? Was there like a kickoff event that triggered this, or what triggered it? Because if you go back 20-30 years ago, people were on handshake contracts almost, no?
Sorry?
I said people who used to be, they stayed at a club for 20 years for the duration of their career, and they were on handshake contracts. So yes. Where did the idea of a union come from?
Well, the FIFPro exists since 1965, but a major breakthrough was the Bosman ruling in the 90s. Mm-hmm. And yes, that was even when a contract was ended, a player was not free to join another club. Even if the contract was ended, a club was entitled to ask as many money for a player to go to another club. And Bosman, the Belgian player, fighted this ruling, and he was supported by FIFPro. And in the end, it resulted in the rule that after your contract, you are free to move. That seems nowadays very logical, but in these days it was not. And since then, FIFPro has really grown and has been a partner for everybody in the football industry. And since then, we have a very strong collaboration also with FIFPro, with FIFA, a very good collaboration. And I think in the next hour I can say more about it, because also FIFA has seen that representation of the players is very important also for their organization.
Absolutely. Stefan, so we have a little bit of a history. Obviously, we used to be on the tennis court together. It's nice to have you here. I'm very happy. You've been very active throughout your career on the brand side, and you have now moved into the agency side. So what does MTAA stand for? What does it do? And how did you end up where you are? Because I know that it's only been a couple months since you guys started, or since you joined the agency, right?
Yeah, so I mean, really great to be here. Firstly, Eric, we've known each other for the last 15 years, 16 years, maybe even. And I mean, my background is very much in brand and marketing, like you said. It's I came from a Nike background, so a sports background predominantly, really focusing a lot on creating sustainable and successful partnerships between the Nike brand and other partners. I've been with MTA more than an agency for about 10 months now. The company was founded in January 2019. And what we look at, and now let's just take a quick look already into, the life of a football player. The life of a football player when he's about 18, 19, 20 years old, he comes up, right? He starts performing, he starts being noticed, he starts growing. And of course, this is with a few obvious outliers. Some have already peaked at that time or already, considered some of the world's best. Then by the age of 25, 26, 27, they usually reach their peak in terms of income, marketability, performance, etc. And then it's somewhat of a downhill slope, right? Until the age of 34, 35. And then they retire. Now, when they retire, that's where things start getting a little complicated, so to say. There are quite a few players that don't quite have it figured out when they finish playing football, and obviously want to continue living the same lifestyle that they have been living, but the financial means have significantly decreased at that point. Where MTA comes in is looking at the player life cycle at any stage, whether we work with 18 to 19-year-olds, whether we work with 25-year-olds, whether we work with 35-year-olds, and looking at their welfare at that point, and then post-career, making sure that they're set up in a way where they have the financial capability to sustain the same lifestyle that they had before, that they create maximum impact with their brand name and who they are as people, that they stand for something, and that they, another big aspect of a brand is that they start working with brands or are currently working with brands that are authentic to who they are. And we basically look at different pillars. We look at the brand piece, we look at the investment piece, we look at business creation, we look at all these sort of things for players individually, to really make sure that they continue to build their personal brand, they continue to have impact on the world and their following, and that by the time they retire, they're in a place of comfort.
So how does something like this start in Dubai? I mean, it's the golden city, what everybody is talking about. How did you guys get started? And share a little bit about the profiles of the two other co-founders, because I think you guys have a really nice story to be told.
Yeah, so one of our co-founders worked for the tourism board here in Dubai, and he, in his last, I think in the last 9 years or so, he basically took care of all the players and other celebrities and athletes that would come to Dubai under the Dubai tourism umbrella. He would build very strong relationships with them, and that's more as a result of who he is and his good heart, rather than it being on a professional level. He would build relationships with them. Those players would go back to their clubs in their respective countries and tell their buddies, when you go to Dubai, call this guy. He will take care of you. And he just started building this tremendous network that very few people in the world have. And he did it out of the good of his heart. And then our other partner, who's based in London, the two of them looked at this network and said, there's opportunity here. There are things that we can start exploring here. And there's an obvious gap in the market. And that gap in the market is exactly what I just discussed. It's trying to switch the model a little bit, like trying to get innovative with the world of football, the way that football players interact with brands, the way that football players invest their money, the way that they interact with their fan base. And at the same time, like I keep mentioning impact, because I think it's important when you have, such a such a huge following as individuals, and you have such a big brand name, and you often come from, you know, relatively humble beginnings, there is a need to give back, and that's also one thing that we really stress on. So that started building out over the year of 2019. But what I do want to say, I feel like it's a business that was 8 years in the making. And we finally got to a point where, you know, now we work with quite a few players. We want to give them 100% of our attention, and we have their best interest at heart, which I think is also important.
Yeah, Thijs, if you would say a quick differentiation between offering post or second career services versus the profile currently that agents for players and athletes are fulfilling, what would you say is the big difference? And do you see any trends of how that has maybe shifted over the last few months, over the last few years?
Well, I think that what Stefan is saying is, I absolutely agree. If you look at the good agents, they don't work with a player only when they have to change clubs. It's a constant process of guiding a player in his career, and if he is changing clubs, yes or no. I think if you look at the differentiation, Stefan is telling about players, obviously more the big names with a brand name, where I am more concerned about the average player with which can also explore his name. At the moment, he is looking for a new job after his career, but it's not his brand name itself that can do the work. He is an average player, and it can help him to get in contact. His career can help him to get in contact with future employers, but then he has to do it on his own strengths, and education can help there. With the Players Union, we were organizing an online academy for players. That was a very important tool in this COVID times. Everybody is online learning now at the moment, but a few years ago this was really new, and it helped players because for them it was a problem to follow an education if you don't know where you are the next year. You can be in another town, you can be in another country, but with an online academy you could still fulfill your education. And well, that was a very important step for the players. That was a really great step. And as I look at the average professional player, employers are happy to work with them because during their career they have shown specific characteristics that are interesting for employers. They have character, they have social ability, and these things are important for an employer. And in this category, not so much the brand name. Yes, it's a good introduction, but then they have to do it with their own strength.
Yeah, I'm going to launch a quick poll before Stefan maybe goes through this player life cycle again. And we're going to ask now is like, when should an athlete start planning with its second career or the second career planning? So I'm just going to throw this out here. While Stefan, maybe you go back to the life cycle of a player, and when does it actually start? When do you guys start advising athletes, or in your case, mainly football players, on their second career?
So for us, I mean, the earlier the better, right? Like it's like if you look at yourself as an individual, and when your parents told you like make sure you save money, you know you start that when you're 18, 19, 20, when you start your first job. You don't want to start that when it's I don't want to say too late, but when it's far along in the process. So we work with and once again, we work with very select few players. We don't work with tens or hundreds of different players, just because we want to give them our full attention. But our player age range anywhere from 21 to 26 to 30. And these players are all at very different stages in their life. They're playing for completely different clubs. They make different money. They have different sort of marketing and social appeal. They're interested in different things. And with all of that, also our plan for them is tailored, right? We look at different investments. We look at different brand opportunities for them. But for us, I mean, the answer is the earlier you start with something like this, the earlier you start planning for your second career or life after football, the better, right? Because your career as a football player is 15, 16 years old, 15, 16 years of duration if you're lucky, and the earlier you start, the better for sure.
Okay, Thijs, any comment?
Yeah, I think nowadays a youth player is already living as a professional since he's 15 or something, and it's important that he finishes his school education at this age. And for instance, a player like Donny van der Beek, who just joined Manchester United from Ajax, he did this online academy to finish his normal school education at the age of 16, 17. And it was also encouraged by Ajax, because you show discipline when you finish which is also important in football. So that is an important phase. And then they're working on their career maybe until they are 25. And then a lot of players realize, okay, now I have to think about my second career. And then, of course, it helps as they finish their normal school education at the age of 17, 18. And then they start to go in a specific education, which could be sports management or marketing. Well, we now see that some directors or clubs are coming from this online academy of the Players Union, and they roll from this from their player career to another career. For many it's within football, but for many, of course, also outside football. So that are two important phases. First, as a youngster, end your normal education, and then from 25, plan your second career after your professional football career.
Okay. There's whose responsibility should it actually be? The clubs are usually not so much involved in this second career planning. Is there a reason for that one?
Well, that of course there. I think that the big clubs, they are aware of the importance. Maybe they have some more financial possibilities, but that shouldn't be that is not the most important thing. They have to be aware that a disciplined player, a player who also has a fulfillment in his life, when he is injured, when he's out of the team, it can really help a player to have to work on a second career next to his football career. And luckily more clubs are aware of this, especially with their young players. With the older players, it's a little bit different, because then they think, well, where are these players in 2 years? And then it's not my responsibility anymore. But I think it's a joint responsibility for the football industry to prepare players, the main actors in the football industry, for a second career.
Mm-hmm. I mean, during COVID now, we've seen a lot of things happening. And if you look at the statistics, I mean, there's tens of thousands of players and athletes that are either out of contract or not able to find a club, and so on and so on. So what are some of the typical career business options that the players are having? Maybe now they are, TikTok and YouTube heroes while they're not on the field practicing. But Stefan, what are the typical business and career options that you are exploring, and how does that work?
So we don't necessarily look at, career options for our players. We really look at we really look at three things. We look at investments, and basically looking at attractive high growth opportunities, where the player would invest. And obviously at the same time, to Tyson's point, I think it's very important that in parallel they get educated around that, and understanding the process around that and how that's done. We look at attractive brand opportunities that are relevant to them as a player, and we also look at business creation, right? Like looking at the interests of that specific player, whatever it is, and looking at creating businesses from scratch for them. So those are sort of our three pillars, and with that, we want to make sure that that also keeps them busy enough outside of football, so they don't really need to look at a career or a job. But what often happens, and I mean, I think you guys can agree, is when players do retire, and when they do finish, especially the top players, it's usually a commentator, it's usually a trainer, it's usually a coach that they become. But I think what's interesting, Eric, the point you bring up on social media, this is a point that I also always love to sort of double down on, because it's such a new thing in football, and we spoke about this previously, where 10, 20, 15 years ago, when this wasn't existent, sort of the only ways for a football player to become famous was through performing on the pitch or making it in the newspapers. And outside of that, there was really nothing else. Now, irrespective of your performance on the pitch, you can still become extremely famous through Instagram and through TikTok and Facebook and Twitter and whatever else. And it's also become sort of an alternative stream of income for many of these, because a lot of brands look at that and say, okay, we can get ROI if we work with this player, simply by engaging with his social media followers. And so I think, to your question, yes, a lot of players are focusing on this, and a lot of players have grown sort of their following over the last 6 months as a result of their fan base being on their phones more often and engaging with them as a result of people spending more time at home. So it's a definite big stream of income, especially for the bigger players.
Okay. What about the average player? And again, we can throw up one of the polls here. So the question here is income coming from social media. How much do you think a player, let's say outside of the top 100 most marketable athletes, could earn from social media? So let me just throw this out here and see what the sentiments are on this one. Thijs, what do you think? Or Stefan? I mean, looking at social media and additional revenues or income for these players and athletes, what do you think? Where do we sit?
So Thijs, before you answer, I just want to say one thing, because I think one thing that's important here is, when it comes to social media, there's players and there's people. So even outside of football, even outside of sport, that are like they're attractive for brands to use holistically. And by holistically, I mean any brand will work with them just because they have super high engagement on their page and they have millions of followers. But there's also people who are niche. They focus on something very specific. So they focus on football products reviews, or they focus on coffee, or they focus on whatever it may be. And it's then then they start attracting brands in those specific niche markets that would definitely pay for them, even if they only have 50 to 100,000 followers. Now, the income that they make is not as significant as the bigger players with 40, 50 million followers, but nonetheless, it's a completely different approach. So I just wanted to say that before I let Thijs answer.
My view is that we all know the examples, the good examples of people who found this niche on social media. but it's not simple. I'm on social media and now it's happening. It's also a talent, and not everybody has this talent to find this niche. For instance, I'm playing golf now for 2 years, and I'm following a guy on Twitter, and everybody is asking him, "Hey Max, what do you think of my swing?" You know, and they show, and he has such a funny answers on these guys who think they are good, but he's making fun of them in such a way that even I am following him, because while I'm not a golf addict. That's an example of someone who is very talented and he can do something with it. For the average player, it's not interesting what he's eating for dinner. Yes, when a star says, "Hey, this is a nice pasta," he gets a lot of responses. So that is a difference. But I think for every player, you can show who you are. You can you can show your identity on social media, and that helps you, for instance, to find a good partner in your second career. I don't think you must start on social media with the idea I'm making big money. Not for the average player, because then you are forcing yourself, and it's important that you be what you are and not be someone else because you think that can be successful on social media. So I think that that's a different different objective as for the big names, definitely.
What about, now during COVID? I mean, a lot of athletes have gotten involved with some CSR project, and we were talking 2 days back about Rashford. Is that brand building? Is that something that just comes from the heart? Is that an opportunity for him to increase additional revenue streams? And is that brand building for him? How do you see something like this?
So, I mean, I see it as firstly coming from the heart. I think especially with a player like Rashford, I mean, he's 22 years old. He's by no means like one of the oldest players in the Premier League, but to then give, thousands of meals to kids across the country and to continue pushing for it, right? It wasn't something that was just during COVID. Like, this is now something that he wants to focus on, and he wants to bring people into, he wants to bring restaurant groups into. Like, he's really concentrating on growing it and basically leaving some sort of legacy there. And as a result, you build your personal brand. And as a result, you draw PR attention, which I don't think by any means was his intention. And it shouldn't be. Like, you shouldn't do something out of the good, like you shouldn't do something good for publicity, or you shouldn't do something good, for the wrong reasons. But I think it's important that, like Ty said, when you look at building out your social media profile, it needs to be authentic to who you are. You need to show people who you are, what you care about, what you stand for, and make it real. Don't make it forced and post for the sake of posting, because people will pick up on that. Like, the amount of time, and I'm sure you guys can agree, like when you look at someone posting about a specific topic or a brand or a charity or whatever, you can tell if it's something that's been staged or forced rather than it being natural. When you watch interviews with Rashford, you can see it's coming, he's been there, and it comes from a place of authenticity, and it's something that's really relatable. So I think, one, focus on doing good for the sake of doing good. Don't forget about capturing it. Forget about like PR and press. And secondly, those things, will come as a result.
I think more than another story of accidental PR and so on is also out of Holland, no? Thijs, can you just give us the story of what happened there with the good old friend, Mr. Robin?
Yeah. No, that is really a fantastic story. You all know Arjen Robben. He had a fantastic career at Chelsea, Real Madrid, Bayern Munich. And then in 2019, he stopped his career at Bayern, and he went back to his hometown, Groningen in Holland. And he did some work in his first year out of contract, charity, etc., etc. He built a house for the rest of his life, and then COVID came, and he really saw that his first club, FC Groningen, which is an average club in the Dutch Eredivisie, was getting in trouble, and people were asking him, Arjen, can't you do something? And he really saw the people struggling there, not only at the club but also in the town. And well, it was the footballer in him, and not to make a career, but just the fun of playing football and helping his club, that he thought, well, I think I'm going to train again. I see that I can have such an impact on this club and on the people there. And he announced that he was coming back. And it not only helped FC Groningen because the shirt revenues went huge, it also helped the fans to get in their self-confidence, but it also helped Robin to get an image in the whole country, which was tremendous. Also, people from other clubs thought, well, this is really a big step. He has won everything in his career, and now he's not going to Ajax to win a next title or to PSV. No, he's going to his first club. He knows he's going to lose a lot of matches, more than he is used to in his whole career. But he does it for the fans, and he does it for the clubs that raised him to become a star like he became. And that was really a tremendous story here in Holland during this COVID period.
And I think another great thing that came as a result of this is everybody in the world now knows FC Groningen, right? Just as a result of him joining and it just being all over the news, social media, like he goes back to his first club. It's something that, like, and I don't know if you guys can give an example, but I can't think of any player who's done this before, like, or at least a player of that sort of magnitude.
No, that makes it really special. And
Yeah.
maybe because of this step, he was the first, but maybe not the last, because it really makes a much bigger impact than when he had went to a big club.
Beautiful, yeah.
One thing maybe quite some time ago was the only person I can remember of was Franz Beckenbauer, when he came back and he played 1 year in Hamburg. So it was really a big PR stunt, and then afterwards he then finally retired. But it obviously doesn't have the same impact nowadays with social media and spreading the word around the world. So this one was a great one. Let me ask you a little bit of a controversial question here. Do you think that this should actually be a strategy of clubs or leagues and so on, to look at players that are very marketable on social media? And I'm going to throw this out here as one of our polls again. So where the question is, under personal brand building, does a strong social media image increase the potential transfer market value of an athlete? And again, you know, it's just food for thought. What do you guys think about it?
I mean, it's such a tough question. I think I can start the conversation off with a good example of Cristiano Ronaldo going to Juventus, and you know, his transfer value didn't necessarily go up, but everything around that transfer benefited Juventus tremendously, right? Like, they're obviously jersey sales and in turn sales for Adidas at the time went up. Sponsorship packages started increasing. I know Jeep, you know, committed more money as a result of Cristiano moving there. So, you know, we're talking about one of the, if not the biggest player in the world. So it might not be the best example, but I think it's a good, you know, it's a good way to think about.
Okay.
We have a Dutch coach, Louis van Gaal, and he always said, I'm not only interested in the footballer, I want to know the complete human being. And he used to go, when he wanted to have a player in his team, he used to go to the home of this player, meet his wife, and he wanted to know what kind of character I have in my group. So it's not so much by the time he was the coach of Ajax, of course, there was no social media, but it shows that, yeah, for some coaching, and I can agree with it, the character of a player is also important. It's not just the football performance which is important. For some coaches, also the character and the personality is important. And you want to have a fine group with people who are the fans can identify with in a positive way. Is it on social media or not? But yes, I can imagine that's important too for a club and for a coach.
And look at FC Groningen and Robin, right? Like if you look at that example, the reason that this was such a big deal is because Arjen Robben is such a famous player, and he brings so much to the table, and it really worked out well for FC Groningen.
Yeah, and it's also it also can attract other players, eh? And I'm sure, for instance, you were talking about Ronaldo when he went to Juventus. I'm sure that when Matthijs de Ligt from Ajax had to choose for clubs to play for, he thought, well, if I go to Juventus, I'm playing with Ronaldo. What an opportunity that is. Maybe without Ronaldo, he would have been going to Manchester City or to Barcelona. And it's the same with the smaller club as FC Groningen. What for all these players, it's a huge experience to play together, to sit in the dressing room with a player like Arjen Robben.
And I think one more thing to add to that, which is also an interesting one. Like you look at the power of football mixed with the power of social media. If you have a player with, I don't know, 1 million, 20 million, 40 million, 50 million followers going to a club and transferring to a different club, they don't just bring, I feel, monetary value with them. I feel they also tend to bring new fans with them, right? Like I wonder how many people started supporting Juventus as a result of Cristiano Ronaldo going there, or Matthijs de Ligt, or whoever, right? Like because more and more we're in the lives of these football players. We become fans of the players themselves and not necessarily only the clubs. And we follow them wherever they go. Like if my favorite player went from one club to the other, I would have an affinity towards that club as a result of that player being there. So I think that's also sort of important from a value standpoint.
We had a company featured a couple of weeks back, which was called Sportscred, and basically what they're doing is they're allowing football clubs to onboard their players' social media accounts, and then having collective audiences. So if the club has 5 million and you're adding all of your players to it, then probably you're going to have a reach of 40 million. And they're trying to commercialize this as a result, not only to bring sponsors in for the club, but it could also be, or it's also used as additional revenues for some of the players, because they're going to have a revenue model or revenue sharing model to this one. Do you think that looking at creative ways of paying athletes and players these days, that this could be an option, that clubs use social media accounts or the social media impact that its players and athletes are having to generate money that can be shared? So that, a lot of times, players, Cristiano Ronaldo, definitely his contract value was determined also on the number of shirts he was selling. But do you think that for average clubs and for average players, and let's take, some of the leagues in Asia, if it's in Thailand or Indonesia or even Philippines, that this could be a model that athletes, players, and their social media reach could help the clubs generate money, and that they come up with revenue sharing models to either compensate salaries or just give players an additional revenue stream?
Maybe for Stefan the best to answer.
So I mean, when you're looking at smaller leagues and you're looking at Asia, you know, as far as I understand, you'd have your salary, you'd have your, you know, your goal bonus, and you have this and you have that. I think if you're able to drive additional revenue and additional income to a club as a result of your personal social media profile, I do think you should have a share of that, right? If you bring in additional, I think there's a big difference here between like bringing in additional sponsors, long-term sponsors, long-term deals, partnerships, etc., as a result of who you are as an individual and who you've attracted to work with the club that you play for, versus like the smaller things like jersey sales, or you know, like sales that happen in the fan shop, like that I don't think is particularly attractive, nor for the player nor for the club. And I think it gets a little bit complicated. But I think getting commission as a player on you know, big deals that you bring in, is something that is attractive for both club and player, because you're essentially incentivizing the players to bring in money and to bring in sponsors into the club that they play for.
Yeah, and I think I was just thinking about it because, you know, especially in the smaller leagues in Asia, the clubs probably pull their talent from the region that the club is located in. So there might be much more importance on a local player that might not have the big international or regional appeal or fame, but on a local level, they might be able to be really influencers within the community.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And another thing, Eric, that I think is also interesting is if you have a big player from, you know, a specific country. Let's say you have a big player from Japan who moves to a team in Thailand. It's all of a sudden also attractive for the Japanese companies to stand behind their man and sponsor one of these teams, or sponsor him, or whatever it may be. So I think it also depends on sort of the pull you have on a national level.
Okay, good. Thais, I mean, if you compare the modern athlete with what happened about 10, 15, 20 years ago, what's the one big thing, or what do you see the differences nowadays?
Well, what I see is that the players are much more prepared for a professional career as they are 20, 30 years ago. I think that has to do, which I said, that most of the professional players are during their youth years are already in a professional club while being a talent, and so they are grown up in a professional environment, and education is an important part of it. I think the players are much more educated in these days, which makes them also less vulnerable because as Stefan is pointing out, it's very important to surround you with good people during your career. And when you have a good education, it's you are more convinced that your second career will also flourish. And if you don't have an education and you think, well, what will happen with me when I'm finished with my professional football career, you are maybe listening to stories of not the good people who want to invest with your money, etc., etc. We know, unfortunately, all the stories of players who have earned a lot of money, but also lost a lot of money during the career because they give themselves to investors. And now, with players being much more professional, much more educated, they are less vulnerable. And I think that's a very positive development.
Yeah. We had a good question from Patik, and that goes really into where we are today, which is the welfare and the second career planning. So he was asking the question here, you think that investments and savings are also equally important? I mean, savings is one thing, that's really your financial advice, but Stefan, I mean, you are the ones offering the services of looking at that potential investment mixes to plan for the career after the career, right?
Yeah, and to answer Pratik's question, I think it is equally, if not more important. You know, we look at a couple of things. We obviously look at the investment piece, and these are short-term or long-term investments. And obviously, you know, we do our ultimate best to make sure they grow as much as they can over time. The second thing that we look at is a model where you, like, as a player working with a brand or working with a company, you don't just look at it short term, right? Let's not look at like, okay, we're going to do a campaign for brand X and we're going to take a check and that's the end of the conversation. What we're looking at is, you know, we look at player X and we say, which kind of companies and brands are close to your heart? Which ones do you want to work with? What do you care about, etc.? And then we start looking at different companies in that sphere. And instead of doing this, you know, campaign for check model, we say, let's look at taking equity in that company. Let's look at, you know, revenue sharing, like you pointed out earlier. If you look at models like that, especially the equity piece, and you're doing it with the company that, you know, we're obviously confident is going to grow over time, then that sort of equals investment / savings as well, right? Then you have an investment portfolio, which is separate from this. You're a business owner of several different businesses that, you know, we've selected for you because we think it's going to become a massive growing company. And then on top of that, of course, we encourage the players to save money. So if you focus on those three things, which is something that's, you know, to what Thijs was saying before, which is probably something that's very different than it was even, you know, 5 to 10 years ago. If you focus on these three things, I think you're in a very good position, and you do it right. You're in a very good position by the time you retire.
Right. Yeah. Thijs?
Yes, I think you are in a very good position. That's true. What you see is when a player is playing, he is full of adrenaline. He is willing to score. It's an exciting life, and then it's difficult to tell to him, oh, now you finish your career, you have earned a lot of money, you can now live quiet and easy. That's not the character of a young sportsman. So he's always willing to see opportunities to get the same excitement more or less as during his playing career. And that makes him also vulnerable for making the wrong steps to go for the quick money. And at that point, it's very, very important that you have the right people next to you who can protect you and who can guide you into the second career. I think Stefan has made a point there already.
Yeah, and I think you know, to your point, Thijs, I think we spoke about this briefly earlier. Like when you, as a football player, become aware of what you stand for, and you build your personal brand, and you find what you're passionate about, you start attracting the relevant opportunities in those different spheres. And then by the time that you finish playing football, you have a very good grasp of what you're interested in and what you want to pursue. And because you've spent time, you know, building that persona, ensuring that people know, you know, the things that are dear to your heart, I think what happens automatically as well is that you kind of become a magnet for the relevant opportunities.
Yeah. We're almost closing off here again, so try to slowly come to an end. Thijs just mentioned something. It's important to have a good network around you, and Stefan, that's the same thing that you mentioned earlier. Can you just define a little bit what is good people and how do you find them? And you know, what do you mean with having a good network, having good people around you, advising you what the right step is for your second career planning?
Yeah, I think it's important to take a step back and look at, you know, where the majority, so it's very hard to talk about, you know, football as a whole and all players that play professional football, but sort of the players that we work with, you know, they come up and the people that you're always going to be surrounded by are your family, right? And your family wants the best for you. And as a result, they might be overprotective. They might make decisions on your behalf, and you trust them to make the best decisions for you. But when it comes to you know, the upper echelons of professional football, when you're talking about millions and millions of dollars a year, and you need to make informed decisions on basically, you know, how you're gonna invest that, spend that, save that, as well as, you know, building your personal profile and social media and looking at creating impact and for other people. It's important that you have people around you that specialize in those things, right? When you look at social media, you need good content creators, you need good people who know about personal brand building. When you speak to the media, you need to be media trained, and you need to understand how to speak to the media. When you're looking at investment, you need to be surrounded by people who know how to invest money. And I think that's where, you know, other sports in the world are much better equipped at the moment than football is. If you look at the NBA and you look at the NFL, you know, as soon as you come into the league, you're provided with training on how to do these things. And whether you take the training or you don't take the training, great. But the thing is that this is coming from the league itself. This doesn't happen in the Eredivisie, Bundesliga, La Liga, Premier League, where you come into the league as a let's call it a rookie, and you're provided with sort of the tools in order to, you know, get a good grasp on sort of your next moves. So my point is this: I think it comes from, you know, surrounding yourself with the right experts is important, and it can come from various different angles. It can come from the league, it can come from the club, so it's more like a top-down approach, or there's the bottom-up approach where you as a player are responsible for selecting the people around you that you want to work with. And that is a result of experience, and it's a result of education. And I think, you know, going all the way back to Thijs's point, I think it's something that can be learned. I think if you're able to spot an opportunity, if you're able to read people, and if you're able to quickly suss out if this relationship is going somewhere or it's not. Yes, there are going to be times where, you know, you might go into a bad investment, or you might go into a bad deal, but you'll get a good grasp around who the right people or company or experts are that can take you forward from whether it's a financial standpoint or from a brand standpoint.
Right. Thijs, what kind of advice would you give a club in these days to deal with their players in terms of like a little bit of a career advice? What should clubs do? I mean, is there maybe like a policy that is missing that would help clubs to prepare the current players a little bit better for their second career in terms of image building, brand building, and so on and so on? Is there one tip that you can give?
Yes, well, I think that it's important not only for the clubs, but also for the leagues, and also for the leagues in Asia, that they don't have to be afraid to give a player that a player is really listened to, and that he is represented. It's my strong belief that player representation does not only strengthen the player, but does strengthen the football industry in general. And I think it benefits a league, it benefits the club when the welfare of the player, when it's taken care of, and when the player is listened to, and when the player is given a voice. I think this will make the whole football industry stronger. It will help him during his career. It will help him after his career, and it will give a much more positive image for the whole football industry. So yeah, that's my main message.
I have to drop esports quickly here because we wouldn't go 19 sessions without mentioning the name esports, but we almost didn't. So esports has a much closer relationship between the actors and the fans. Do you think, Thijs, that maybe a policy by clubs that players have to be forced of giving autographs and so on would be a good policy to have, just so that players actually learn that they have to go out and do something that for some of them might not be a natural thing to do?
Yeah, well, I heard, I'm not an expert in esports, but I learned yesterday that there is shortly there is also a players union for esports player. So it's growing massive, I know, and yes, that's one element which is very attractive, which the normal football can learn from. That there is a connection between fans and players, which is very attractive. And yes, I think the normal football world can have a close look at this development. That can be very helpful. Yeah.
Great. So we have had 2 minutes of extra time. It's been an amazing session this morning again. Thijs and Stefan, I really appreciate your support here. Thank you obviously also for everybody who joined in here. Michael, Paul, I'm going to have an offline discussion with you later on. I saw some of your questions and comments, so we will do this later on. Next week, we're going to talk about the new Table Tennis Federation, so please join in. And once again, for now, I would like to say thank you for an amazing session today. And keep in mind, everybody, wash your hands, wear your mask, be safe, and make sure that at some point that the new normal becomes real normal and we can go out, meet in person. It's everybody's responsibility. So keep on doing what you guys are doing. Okay. Thank you very much. Thijs and Stefan again. Super. And have a great day, everyone. Bye-bye.